Welcome back to Heritage Collections Management 2022. Here's your moderator for this session, the Managing Director of Insights and Analytics at Saltflat, John Horodyski. John, over to you.
Hello, good day, good afternoon. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Metadata is Everything, how best to manage it in the here and now. Before we get started, just want to remind everyone that if you are looking for the if you're looking for decolonization, not just a buzzword, that is over in track 2. But I think we want to be over here for this session, which is Metadata is Everything. Before we get started, just some quick housekeeping rules. We are so excited to do a Q&A with you all, so we are prepared for that. So any questions you have, please find on the bottom of the screen where the QA tab is. And I will be managing the Q&A at the end of our session. We've given ourselves about 10 good minutes to do this, so please think of some good questions for our panelists, and then we'll go there. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce the agenda for today. Before we get to our introductions, we're going to meet the panelists. We are going to do a discussion on what is metadata management. We're then going to hear about BT. Then we're going to hear about HSBC. Then we're going to have a panel discussion together, and then we're going to open it up for the Q&A so you can ask us all your great questions. And without further ado, let's meet the panelists. I will go first. For the moderator today, I'm John Horodyski. I'm Managing Director of the Insights and Analytics practice with Saltflats. I've been doing all these good damn metadata governance things for over 20 years now. Privileged to have worked with clients from Fortune 10, 50 and up, all types of industries, CPG, retail, media, all good things. I'm also an adjunct faculty at San Jose State, where I've been teaching a graduate course in DAM for over 15 years now. Also do a lot of public speaking with the Henry Stewart events, with the Journal of Digital Media Management, a monthly column for CMS Wire. Wrote a book a few years ago on DAM, and I have a new book coming out April 4th on metadata. And I'm very excited to share that with you all. And with that, I'm going to pass it to my esteemed colleague, Anne. Hello, Anne.
Hello. Yeah, hi, I'm the Head of Heritage and Archives at BT. I'm just about to cough as I introduce myself, which is never good. So BT has a history that goes back over 175 years. And I'm going to talk today about metadata and how we use it to meet our aims, which are to protect and to promote the heritage of BT.
Awesome. And our next esteemed panelist, James. Good evening, James. How are you?
Hi, thank you. So I'm the Digital Archives Manager at HSBC. I apologise for a little bit of repetition about myself for anyone who joined the earlier session, but I have been working with the bank for the last 11 years or so, and have sort of guided the digital preservation journey at the bank pretty much since I joined back in 2011. And we recently launched a website which was sort of the next step on to sharing more of our rich collections that date back over 157 years or so since the bank's foundation. And I'm excited to talk a bit more about the metadata that underpins both the Digital Archive and the New History website.
Fantastic. Thank you, James, and thank you, Anne. I already see a lot of discussion here in the chat. So again, if you have some questions to start thinking of for us, please put it in the Q&A and we will get to that at the end. All right. So why are we doing this panel presentation? There are many good reasons, but a few sort of grounding sort of statements we as a team were thinking of is we want to make sure that everyone understands that when you're thinking of metadata, it's always be mindful to think of both the people, the process, and the technology that's going to transform and influence what you're talking about. We know that metadata matters because, well, it does give structure, it does give meaning to the data that we're all working with, whether it's business or whether it's personal. Metadata tells us where your content came from, how it's going to be used, and then where it can go. Metadata is about the meaning, and it must change with societal norms and in a respectful and inclusive manner. And we are going to talk a little bit about that with panelists today. So again, what is metadata? Well, simply, it's data about data. It refers to that descriptive and structural administrative elements that's defining your content, but it is just so much more than that. Why? Because we need it to have the aboutness and the awareness of what we're trying to serve our content for. Metadata matters because it does define us at any given moment in time. It's sort of a snapshot in time. You know, it gives us the best information available to us for content clarity. You want that content to be discovered and to be found and experienced in the way that it was intended. And that's why metadata is so good. And look at this, language is always in a state of change. When someone asks you, is your metadata done? You can say no, because it just keeps on going. Even at any given point in time, the OED is updated with 1,000+ neologisms. Yes, that is a word that comes from things like new words being invented, adorkable, adulting, zhuzh, sometimes new meanings for existing words like drone. So metadata is never done because it's always in a state of change, both regionally and globally. We have to recognize that metadata is always in a state of change. So let's just be mindful of that to help manage it better. Some good examples of this are, well, and the winner is. If we accept that language is alive, then we must accept that language will grow, evolve, and change over time. Some things need to change as a matter of respect, and other things change as a matter of socio-cultural changes in the world. So look at that example of "and the winner is," familiar to many award shows in many countries, but it begs the question, what is a winner after all? So in 1988 at the Academy Awards, the phrase was changed to "and the Oscar goes to," after the show producer decided to make it less competitive. The argument can be made that everyone's a winner indeed, correct? So why don't we be more reflective and accurate of what it is? Similarly, the whole idea of during the AIDS epidemic in the 1990s, the term VD, which did stand for venereal disease, became STD, sexually transmitted disease, and then to avoid the connotation of something being dirty. Furthermore, it was then changed in 2013 to become STI, or sexually transmitted infection, to indicate a shift away from the stigma associated with the word and the meaning of disease. These examples show us that words do indeed have meaning, and they do change with societal norms over time. Therefore, we have to manage it well. Another, and the last example I want to share is the term cisgender, which was first seen in academia in the 1990s, but it didn't really gain momentum until around 2007 when transgender theorist Julia Serrano used it in her book, Whipping Girl. And then it caught on the popular media and was eventually added to the OED in 2015. Language is evolving and changing, and we, working with our collections and our content, have to be mindful of that change and be respectful and change with societal norms. So the questions I ask for you today who are participating in this webinar is to start thinking about, so is your metadata falling behind? We all have responsibilities to be aware of what is going with our metadata and take responsibilities for the words that we choose. So perhaps is our metadata out of date? Has the terms that we used, are those meanings changed? Have they changed over time? Is the words and are the words that we have used potentially damaging? And is it a new product? Is it a new concept? Keep on thinking of the change that is happening with your metadata to allow for change, healthy, good, respectful change over time. Lastly, the thoughts to share with everyone today is, if data truly is the language upon which our modern society is built, then metadata is that grammar part. It's the construction of all the meaning. It gives us structure and meaning. It allows us to have access to the content. And metadata truly does define our content journey. Our business needs, our user needs, and our language does change over time. Remember, metadata matters because it tells you where your content came from, where it's going, and how it can be used. And as we talk about this today, just be mindful that your metadata needs to adapt to stay relevant in our times right now. So with that as a grounding or a sort of a foundation of our discussion today to talk about metadata management, I'm now going to pass the speaking slides over to my colleague, Anne. Hello, Anne.
Hello, thank you. Okay, so yeah, I'm talking about BT, which is a global communications company with around 100,000 employees. Next slide. And we have a heritage that goes back to 1846, and that was with the foundation of the Electric Telegraph Company. That was the first commercial telegraph company in the UK. The telegraph being a wonder of the age, it revolutionized communications. So you have quite a number of telegraph companies springing up. then telephone companies after the invention of the telephone, and then a national provision of those telecommunications services by the Post Office before the privatisation of BT in 1984. So that's our history, very, very briefly. And the reason that we know about that heritage is because we hold our archive collections, and we describe that as our corporate memory. So it's mainly documented heritage. We have some objects, and there'll be things like advertising, reports, research documentation about different innovations and developments, photographs, academic, architectural plans, digitized collections, both of existing physical objects, but also digital collections created more recently. So it's a rich collection, and the case study that I'll be talking about today is how do we use metadata to manage our collections, as I mentioned, to meet our aims, which are to protect and to promote BT's heritage. And then what's on our agenda? So I'll touch upon a few of the things that John talked about. What are the things that we're thinking about with metadata over the next few years? Next slide. And just to talk about how we manage metadata, our collections are both physical and digital. So we have a physical strong room in Holborn in central London. And then we have our digital preservation repository where we keep all of our digital assets, both the digitized and the born digital content. And then over the top of that, we have our collections management system, which is all the descriptive metadata that tells us about our collections. Next slide. So I'm looking at an example here of a poster from our collections. So this is from 1943, and it's advertising the unseen but unceasing work of the engineers during wartime to keep the networks going. And on our right, you can see that's our digital catalogue that describes both our physical and our digital collections, and you can access the digital collections there. And we use some standards for our metadata. So archivists would be familiar with ISADG, which is an international standard for archival description. We also use an international standard for authority records. So an authority might be a person or an organization or a department that you would describe as a metadata piece, and then you can attach that to a particular record so that you then standardize the capture of that and the use of that. And the outcome of that is that as a user, you could find this particular poster by searching by word. You could search by browsing the image. You could use our context tree, which you might be able to just see on the right-hand side there, which takes you from the general, so BT Archives collection, down to the specific, so communications, through to this series of posters from the 1930s to the 1960s. And that's very important in archives to set your material within the context of the organization that created it. And then we also have, you could search via the artist of this particular work and then find it that way. So the metadata is just allowing us to have a way into our material. So it gives the user that access. And then in the background, there's other things that you don't see. So for example, the legal and administrative material. So the copyright, whether it's open or closed, and then preservation metadata in our digital repository that allows us to keep that digital material accessible over time by managing it properly. So I think in some ways I use this poster because I think metadata is often that unseen but unceasing element that's going on in the background, just allowing you to do what you need to do. Next slide. And thinking about what's on our agenda, so what are the things that we're thinking about with metadata? One of the current things is to do with the syncing, the linking, and the portability of our data. And again, I use this example of a photograph from our collection, a 1938 engineer up a telegraph pole. And on the top right, again, you can see that's our online catalogue, and on the bottom right, that's our digital repository. And what we're working on at the moment is trying to sync that metadata. So the metadata from our digital repository and our descriptive metadata should be linked. We don't want to duplicate, so we're working on that. Unfortunately, we have a legacy issue with the digital assets that display on our catalogue don't link currently to the digital repository, which is something that we want to change, because obviously the more we separate that data, the more difficult it becomes to manage. And then in terms of the portability, we're mapping our metadata fields and standardizing them so that it makes them easy to transfer. And actually we found it is, luckily, has been quite easy to use APIs to transfer that data. So that's something that we're looking at. Next slide. And then relating to the, I suppose, the portability of data, there's some people may have heard of a UK major investment in place at the moment called Towards a National Collection. And it's looking at using digital technologies to create a unified virtual collection. So I guess we all know when you're trying to find material across different repositories, there's very different approaches. It's actually quite hard to link all of that material together. And a sub-project that we're partners in, along with various organizations like the Science Museum, is called the Congruence Engine. And so that's looking at specifically industrial-based histories. And that will be using digital, using AI in order to link both collections, as in linking repositories, but also making those links between collections where there are themes that cross over. So that's going to be a really interesting project to be involved in. And that will mean that our metadata has to be easily transferable, because that will be required as part of the project. Next slide. And then the final part, which touches on John's comments around language and meaning and metadata, which is that collections, as we know, are not unbiased. They're a creation of a particular period of time, particular viewpoint, and metadata is also not neutral and may need to be reviewed. So in order to tackle this, we have formed a collaboration with the University of Exeter, a PhD studentship, which will look at Indigenous peoples and British Imperial telecommunications. And you can see a good example is this map from our collection about the British Empire. So showing the all British cable around the world, connecting the empire. But the question is, who were the people that built these networks? What were their experiences? That's not really captured in our collections. So what our student will look at is how can we bring that material into more of a have a wider context, and she'll be working on metadata and enhancing our metadata to make that happen and to make our collections more holistic. So that's something we're really excited about. So in general, I found that I think the link here is that metadata really is the gateway. It allows you to make those connections to your collection, to your users, to other repositories. And now hand back over to John.
Thank you very much, Anne. I'm going to proceed the slide over. Thank you, thank you. It is great to see the good work that British Telecom is doing, not just with archives, but with metadata as well. So very well done. I'm now going to pass it over to our esteemed colleague from HSBC. Hello, James, over to you.
Hello. All right, thank you. Great, next slide, please. HSBC has a long established archive which operates as a global department within the bank's communications function. The bank was founded in Hong Kong in 1865, but our collections date back from the late 18th century onwards and include many predecessor organisations. Whilst we have dedicated physical archival storage vaults in each of the 4 geographic locations that we operate in, which is London, New York, Hong Kong, and Paris, we also, our growing digital collections are maintained within a global digital archive repository. Development on this repository began in 2012 and it's been in production, so sort of fully live system since the start of 2015. Currently, we have just over around about 15 terabytes of digital content, which is being added to on a daily basis. So I imagine that figure has probably changed since I last looked at it. Last year, we launched a dedicated history portal, which showcases the highlights of our archival collection, and we made tens of thousands of digital and digitized records available for users to search and explore. Next slide, please. We also offered curated collections and exhibitions to provide easy points of entry and compelling stories that highlight the depths of the archival collection. Next slide, please. This is so we're here to discuss metadata, and as you can imagine, the project to build the history website relied on strong metadata. We began this project knowing that we wanted to make available as much of the archival collection as possible. Within our existing digital archive repository, we have over 200,000 catalogue records, which represent distinct archival collections managed across 5 regional entities. Our descriptive and technical metadata for these collections is broadly ISAG, MODS, and increasingly METS compliant. Before the website was launched, there was no previously publicly released catalogue, although catalogue descriptions, our descriptive metadata, was made available to researchers upon request. Within our digital archive, we maintain around about 70 fields of non-technical, so descriptive metadata. And obviously, we were not going to subject the users of the website to all of this metadata, and so had to carefully assess which metadata fields to share. And to do this, we needed to carry out research to help us understand user behavior. We worked with trainers in user experience and user interface design, and formed panels of prospective users to try and better understand their potential needs, behavior, and how their user journeys would be enhanced or impacted by the presence of different levels of object metadata. The research that we undertook resulted in user analysis reports, which helped us make projections on the types of users, which in turn led us to identify the need for certain metadata that our data sets didn't currently have, such as geographical locators of content. They also helped us to identify the types of information that would pose no realistic help to users on the journey through the website's content. For example, some of the additional fields of detail within our audio-visual metadata set would just not be particularly useful for end users on the website. This period of analysis also raised greater concerns about the scale of work that would be required to improve the current condition of the descriptive metadata, so the archival descriptions of the content that we wanted to publish on the site. Next slide, please. In order to be able to share content on the website, we needed to undertake a metadata review for all content selected for potential inclusion on the site. Once records were selected for website publication, we needed to apply current cataloging and metadata standards to records, that many of which had descriptions written between the 1970s and the 1990s. A large amount of work had actually been done on the collection in the previous decade, but there were still many records that had either only been lightly touched in previous metadata remediation projects or had been missed out completely. We identified some of the some key areas that were consistent across the collection that needed to be improved, and a couple of examples of these were so geographical names. We needed to ensure that the current place names were applied, but the accepted historical variants were also included so as to aid identification by both. An example of that would be using the term Thailand, but obviously a lot of the records were would be addressing and have content referring to Siam. Date normalization, and this was an example that really called into the need out some consistency in our data expression, but also allowed us to see the limitations of many modern search engines and a lack of flexibility in data passing. So we needed to set thresholds for the date. For example, we had to set some thresholds for dates that were previously expressed as circa dates. We also needed to take care to look for outdated and potentially offensive language and terms. And this was an extension of a wider piece of metadata remediation work that is taking place across the entire collection. But understandably, there's a little more urgency and for the need for immediate remediation for any records that were proposed to be published on the site. And it was also necessary to add new fields that provided, so new fields of metadata that actually provide warnings about actual content that was going to be included. For example, a warning to users that language that could offend could be found in some of the old staff magazines that were going to be published on the site. We needed to consider the provision of greater contextual information as well. If we're providing access to a digitized ledger book, it's necessary to define the purpose of what a general ledger book is. Now, previously, the descriptions that we had, there would be an expectation that a researcher in financial history would know the purpose of that. We're looking to expand to a wider audience. We need to understand and have the data there that supports that wider audience use of the content. And we also needed to improve our metadata to make it more accessible. I'll speak briefly in the next slide about the need for accessible metadata. But this meant that new fields that provided greater accessibility needed to be added. So for example, we needed to add fields that would contain audiovisual transcriptions or descriptions that were compliant with screen reader specifications. We also needed to address some of the ways the site offering would actually increase the metadata that was being shared. Having large data sets of OCR records meant that we now had a greater range of indexable records with content that needed to have its risk judged accordingly. Next slide, please. So further work was also done to create new fields of metadata tags that would help users access and filter their content more easily. Therefore, a large amount of work was put into creating subject tags, which provided an overview of record subject type. So, for example, grouping might have a buildings subject tag, and that would group records together that were about bank buildings. Geographical tags, and this was work that was building on the locations remediation work that we did. So we worked to create a list of Getty compliant geographical tags that the content could be filtered by. And also we worked to create some additional date fields to allow for normalized dates that would fit into a date filtering mechanism that was available on the website search pages. So it's not only about the quality of your metadata, is it fit for a purpose that you intend it to be used for? And in this case, for date filtering, it wasn't, so we needed to make some improvements. Next slide, please. I'd like just to wrap up just by mentioning one area of the power of metadata that perhaps we weren't as aware of as we should have been, at least before commencing the website project, and that is the need for strong data sets of accessibility metadata. The history website was built with accessible design, including both technical and descriptive metadata shared within catalog descriptions. So we needed to ensure that the design and all of the content on the site met the WCAG, so that's the Web Content Accessibility Guideline standards. We commissioned accessibility reports on our proposed designs and the issues that were raised, and we were required to the type of issues that we had to deal with. The result of those reports were ensuring that there were effective descriptions of the metadata fields themselves. So it's not just having a good set of metadata. You need to be able to define, what is a description field for someone that is perhaps using a screen reader or something like that. Field orderings needed to be defined and controlled. And this was something that we've since placed on our wider collections, and it's the necessity to have a defined state of control when progressing through the metadata. So if you are using a screen reader, or if you're navigating through the page of metadata, a description on the site, you need to be able to progress in a fixed order, so that browsing one record isn't in a completely different order to the next. And also we needed to provide descriptions and transcriptions of audiovisual material, and providing that data to allow people to access it who wouldn't necessarily be able to, for example, see the audiovisual material. So as a result of this process, and prior to the website's launch, we created an accessibility metadata set, and this includes alt text descriptions of all fields and descriptive content of all audio and audio-visual material that features on the site. And as a result of this work, we're also going to be carrying forward the accessibility metadata into our general cataloging and metadata standards across the archive. So this was a sort of a good example to end on, because we discovered it, and we're going to be building that next set of metadata to improve our collections and improve our collection accessibility. And with that, I'll hand back to John.
All right, thank you very much, James. I'm gonna unmute my audio and unmute my video. Thank you very much, James, and for those wonderful examples of how you're managing your metadata, your heritage collections. I've learned a lot. I know the audience has learned a lot. How do I know? Because there is a great amount of questions that are coming through here. But before we get to the questions, the panelists, we met several of the last few weeks to review some sort of topics that we just wanted to just sort of touch upon to sort of illuminate more of a discussion. So as we go through these 4 topics, please continue to send off the questions. I'm seeing so many come in. This is incredible to see. So we're going to spend about 10 minutes-ish on this. So governance, to both James and Anne, it's almost like sometimes when you hear metadata, you always hear the term governance very close behind. As you both sort of demonstrated in the collections that you have in heritage services, is that words change. How do you manage the metadata over time? So do you have anything to share in terms of how you're managing governance with BT and HSBC?
Shall I go first? I guess in terms of what I was thinking about data governance, I guess, which we sit separately to the data governance, but obviously have very, very close links and ties with them. And there's been work recently to refresh the whole risk management framework, which has meant that then the data governance frameworks are being also refreshed and changes put in place to policies, controls, standards, which, you know, metadata sits very much as part of that process. And there is work going on with metadata to automate, to make it more scalable, of course. And then, you know, archives, we fit into that structure, and because clearly the records that we're taking, we want to keep permanently, whatever that might mean, but for the very, very long term. And so in terms of classifications, it's the material that we've identified as needing to be kept for historical value. So any benefits in metadata, any improvements in metadata, we will benefit from and be able to take in at the point where we transfer that content into our care. So we watch it with very great interest because of the amounts of benefits that will mean for our collections.
And certainly the fact that you even mentioned there's data governance, there's metadata governance, that actually might be systems or IT governance as well, managing the content we have. James, how is it working for you at HSBC?
Well, given that HSBC is a very large global organization, it's trying to pinpoint areas where we can have the greatest influence, because obviously we're going to be receiving things that are of historical importance for long-term preservation. It's not possible, as much as we would like, to be able to go to every department within the bank and set out some rules. And whilst that would be great, what we need to do is find sort of, I suppose, the what we could refer to as the sort of the influencers of data within the bank, and for us, that is the records and information governance teams, and it's establishing a good working relationship with them, understanding their recommendations, and getting in, I guess, at the ground floor when new regulations, new guides are published and pushed out to become global standards, to ensure that there's not only the ability to easily identify content that we want brought to the archives, but the type of metadata that is being that's sitting on those records, it is consistent with the metadata particularly the metadata fields that we will be storing when it comes into the digital archive, in potentially 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
And hopefully for those in the audience today listening to this webinar, if you're not doing governance, highly recommend you maybe start doing some governance going forward. That will be one of my best practices. Just being mindful of time, automation and technology. Again, we hear terms in heritage museum collections in terms of where does technology place? Obviously for the benefit, what can we do differently? Are either of you using any sort of automation or technology tools to help in your collections?
Well, we are, I can't talk too much about the project because firstly, I'm not directly involved in it, but I know that we're carrying out an interesting pilot where machine learning is being used to review our metadata sets and cross-reference them with external metadata sets to look for connections. And that's quite exciting. I think that's going to be something that certainly is important for us when we're considering the importance of standard, building your metadata sets following standards, because that increases the portability of the metadata and allows us and will allow us in the future to do much more in terms of being able to cross-reference with not just external as this sort of pilot is going with, but internal within the bank. It would be great to be able to start extracting, getting more information out of the existing data sets that you're eventually going to come into contact with, down the line anyway.
That is a great use of technology. I think we always look for those good examples. That is a very good example of one. And how about at BT? Are there any good examples of automation or technology happening?
I mean, for us, it's coming up in the future. It's still on the horizon. But I mentioned the Congruence Engine project, which I suppose is between BT and other organisations, similar to James's comments about using machine learning to create connections or to look at different repositories and kind of cross-reference. I think from what I understand about this project, and it is in the very early stages, because it includes academics, researchers, and technology, there'll be a kind of a view of metadata about the collections, but in a trying to make those kind of connections, these intellectual connections between collections as well, which would be really interesting to see how that all fits together. Within BT, there is work going on with AI and some automation. There's data analytics to capture information about data, and that's something that we part of the conversation with data governance, but that's not something, I think, as James mentioned, it comes a bit further down the line. You just want to be part of the conversation at this stage, so you know what's happening, and then you can kind of work out what the best involvement route is for the archive.
I think a great session for another Henry Stewart event will be AI, artificial intelligence, and museums and heritage collections. I think we all want to be going in that space. Many of us are already dipping in the waters and playing with it, but I think that is a great topic to talk about, is how is technology and AI helping us. The clock is ticking and there are such great amount of questions coming into us. I'm just going to go skip right to advice and best practices so we can actually start addressing them. So to James and to Anne, you've got a lot of people in this webinar who have enjoyed what they've heard from you. What's your advice? What's your sort of like, okay, if you're doing this, do...
I thought about this, and I think the quickest way I can say is that standards matter. So, applying them can be gradual. It doesn't have to be across a full data set, but actually putting those in. However, don't be scared with what you've got to do. A small amount, building from small foundations, it makes your collection stronger. And doing a little will go a long way in time, because you can add to it over time. Your metadata is, as I think you said at the beginning, it's never going to be finished. It's always in a working set. So the sooner you put those foundations, and standards equal portability, equal greater access. And so I would say, if you can do anything, start applying some standards to your metadata.
Yeah, if you're working in metadata, you have a job for life. It keeps going. Wonderful, actually. And what's your advice or best practices for the audience?
James and I should have checked with each other before, because that is exactly the same. I mean, I think standardize, because if you don't do that, then you're making life quite difficult for yourself further down the line. So, you know, think about how easy to move your data will be, and how easy to manage it will be, and also how you can do things at scale, because we're all having. Sorry, it's muted myself, but yeah, we're all having to do that more and more. I spoke to one of our data governance colleagues before this, and you know, he pointed out that if you get the foundations right of good governance and metadata, then you can do what you want to do. If not, it is painful, and you don't know what your problems are. If you don't have metadata, you can't pinpoint your issues. So
the name of the game is, it's standards for everyone listening to this or who's watching this at a future date. Standards. Before we go to the Q&A, let me please just thank you both, James and Anne, for participating today, providing your thought leadership. And on behalf of everyone here on the audience, thank you very much for doing this. Before we get to the Q&A, really quickly, wonderful topic of acronyms going in the background. Just to make it clear, BT stands for, Anne?
Oh, well, BT, the name of the company is BT, but originally it was British Telecommunications, but yeah, we are now BT.
James, what is HSBC?
Again, HSBC is called much the same way as BT. HSBC is its official name. It originally stood for the Hong Kong and Shanghai Banking Corporation.
Fantastic. All right, acronyms done. This question has received the most votes. 10, in fact. So this is an interesting one. So thank you, Joel, for this question. All right, to Anne and James. If language and metadata must change, how are we to treat digital preservation metadata, which is designed to record historical usage context and presentation requirements? Does it stay more calcified or standardized than other types of metadata types? That's a big, good question. Who wants to go first?
I mean, I suppose my immediate thought is that I would try and put a division between the descriptive and the technical metadata, because obviously your descriptive metadata should, must, and will change. Your technical metadata, off the top of my head, I would expect it to. The only way it's going to change is that you're going to be able to profile and characterize the original digital files in a much more forensic way. So perhaps built on rather than changing.
Nice. How about you, Anne?
I'd echo that. I think that's right. You might find that you want to add to it in future, but it's much less likely you'd need to change it, I suppose, for those kind of social and contextual reasons. That descriptive metadata is more of an issue in that way.
Yeah. Excellent question. This one, this is for you, James, and it might just be a shorter answer, but the question is actually, can James share the sensitive content statement developed for your institution? I'm not sure if you're able to share it now with us, but that might be something you might be able to share behind the scenes after we finish this. Is that something?
Yes, certainly. I can get in touch. Yeah.
Excellent. Because actually is a good question. I think many of us are looking for examples what other people are doing, sure. And I very much appreciate from Anonymous that question. That was a good question. All right, another question for the two of you. This is another. It's from Joe. Thank you. Is there an ethical imperative to move or change your metadata faster than the various large standards creation organizations might be doing? So, ethical imperatives and speed, how are you seeing that happening with your two institutions and your collections? James, do you want to try that?
Oh, I think that's quite difficult. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. We, are not always ahead of the curve in these type of things. I think it's very much project driven. If we are embarking on particular projects, then that speeds up our need, and we will go ahead of standards, and we will change things if there isn't a standard there. We are prepared to be flexible in that regard. In terms of general standards, I would say it would be great to be a leader on it, but I think it takes a wider community involvement, and I don't think we would have the resource, let alone the inclination to propose standards that weren't collaboratively produced.
How about you, Anne? Any interesting
Yeah,
ideas?
I think often, I mean, I think this is quite typical in archives, that often it is a community-led thing. You tend to collaborate. Often archives have limited resources. We can have some quite small teams. So I think it's just a mix of what your priorities are relating to your, the organisation that's funding you. What is it that you're trying to achieve, and then what comes along in terms of collaborations or projects that you might be able to get involved into, improve the metadata or to meet those aims. So yeah.
Our time is pretty much up. James, there's another question for you to talk about some of your user design principles, but we can get to that afterwards. I guess my final question, this is an interesting one from Matthias. I do like this. Matthias says, I'm still a fan of social tagging and uncontrolled vocabulary. Is this still a thing? Is it? Why? Why not? How do you all feel about sort of the social tagging and uncontrolled vocabulary? Opinions?
So this would be kind of encouraging maybe other communities to tag your images, or yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting concept. We haven't done that. We haven't tried that. So it's not something that I can really comment on particularly. I think anything where you can get people involved in engaging with your archive collections is of benefit. I think, just tagging in general, I guess that's where things like, machine learning might be going. And I suppose there might be issues to do with the reliability of that. But yeah, I mean, in general, I think it would be very interesting. I just haven't got any personal experience of that.
How about you, James? Are you doing any of that over there at HSBC?
I mean, define uncontrolled. We certainly actually on the website, we put up a data set that was essentially crowdsourced. The metadata was crowdsourced. There's a collection of several thousand war cards from the First World War of the bank's employees that fought in the First World War. And we went out to, it was open to anyone who worked for the bank to pool their resources and start adding, tagging metadata. I have to say we did put some controls on that, so it's not completely unstructured, but that was a really successful project, and I think we'd be all for. It's almost setting the structures up to facilitate a project like that is resource heavy, and love to do more, but finite amount of people and resource.
I like social tagging, but let's have some people behind the scenes to help maybe get some control back into the social tagging. Our time is up. We're going a little bit over. I want to first and foremost thank the audience for these great questions. There are a few more for us, for James and Anne to look at, but thank you, audience. And again, if everyone can just please thank both Anne and James for their wonderful contribution and thought leadership to this discussion of metadata management for our museums and heritage collections. So thank you very much, everyone, for being part of this webinar today. Now you can head over to track 1 for our final presentation, Managing Assets at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Be well and see you all very soon.